Welcome to your NYCP program annual performance reporting webinar. Today is March 17th. Happy St. Patty's Day if you're inclined to acknowledge such things. Glad to have you all here. We'll go ahead and get started with our standard disclaimer.
This presentation was produced under U.S. Department of Education contract number GS00F115CA with Synergy Enterprises, Inc. The views expressed herein do not necessarily represent the positions or policies of the U.S. Department of Education. No official endorsement by the U.S. Department of Education of any product, commodity, service, or enterprise mentioned herein is intended or should be inferred.
All right. Now that we've got our standard disclaimer out of the way, I'll go ahead and welcome our program officer, Ms. Donna J. Bussell, your program officer for the NYCP program, who is here to support us and hopefully respond to any questions that may come up along the way. Welcome, Donna.
Thank you. I'm glad to see everybody here today.
Very good. My name is Tracy George. I'm a member of your technical assistance team. I am joined by my colleagues, Olani Lilly and Sarah Brightwell, who are also here to support, answer any questions that you may have. They're monitoring the chat box. We're also going to be dropping into the chat box a number of documents and tools along the way. Feel free to type any questions that come up for you into the chat box. As we go along, we'll pause periodically. If we haven't been able to answer questions in the chat box, we'll pause so that we can acknowledge those verbally. We're going to go through some various sections, and we'll pause after each of those sections. So here is an overview of our topics for today. It probably looks pretty familiar. We're going to cover all parts of your annual performance reporting forms, including the cover sheet, the executive summary. We'll get into detail around Part A, talk about Part B, and then we hope everyone will be able to stay on to the end, because we do have a new tool to support your reporting in Section C as well. So we have a number of documents that we're going to be sharing along the way. And right now, Olani is going to drop all of them into the chat box so that you can download them now if you want to. That includes separate documents for both the cover sheet and the executive summary, and as well as those parts A, B, and C, and all three tools that we're going to share along the way. We'll be sure to post those in the chat box as we go as well, in case you don't grab them right now. But just wanted to make sure that they were at least all there if you wanted to grab them at the beginning and follow along or have those printed off. All right, oops. Sorry about that. That was getting a little ahead of myself there. Here we go. So first is the timeline. It was some due dates and important benchmarks along the way. G5, the system where you do your reporting for your annual reports, is open. Will be open as of tomorrow, March 18th. We're here in the middle stop, March 17th, with your APR webinar. And if you don't already have it on your calendar as a deadline, you'll want to mark your calendars for April 29th, 4:30 p.m. sharp is when that APR is due. And those of you who are veterans at this process know that G5 is really strict with those times. And note that is Eastern time, 4:30 Eastern time. But G5 will close down and you won't be able to enter any data or information after that time. So you might actually want to back up from that a couple of days and put a due date on your calendar for a day or two early. The advice around that is because, it's not just you entering in your annual performance report, it's everybody in this cohort, all other grantees across Office of Indian Education, as well as grantees outside of Office of Indian Education. So you don't want to get stuck in that traffic jam on April 29th. G5 can get a little overloaded and you don't want to get stuck and be late to your destination. All right. So first, we always like to kick off these webinars with a little reminder about why we do annual performance reporting. It is a requirement of the federal grant that you have, and it was really the primary document that's submitted annually that allows you to show progress towards those project measures and GEPR measures that you report on. This document is really highlights all the wonderful work that you're able to do and things that you're able to accomplish. It shows how you're able to demonstrate substantial progress towards those objectives. That information is reviewed, it is looked at and aggregated. It's also used to inform continuation award decisions at the end of grant year. So although we know we're coming to the end of our projects for this particular cohort. So it is still very important. Okay, so as you some of you know, or if you're new to your position as a project director, G5 is the system where you submit those annual performance reports. A reminder that really only the project director of record may access the G5 system and enter that information. So if you are a new project director, now is the time to make sure that you have access to G5. You want to ensure that you can get in there now, and as of tomorrow, when those forms and reporting forms are available, so that doesn't get you hung up a little later on down the road. You can make sure that you have plenty of time to get access. So the G5 system does occasionally undergo some maintenance. So this landing page is a good place to check and make sure if you're going to be working at certain times or odd hours of the night, you know that it's not closed for any maintenance. If you have any trouble accessing G5 or you have any questions about the forms in there, they do operate a help desk. That little red box down there in the lower left-hand corner, you can see there's a few different ways you can get a hold of those folks. They have their standard hours of operation are 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. Eastern time, except for federal holidays. And then they have a couple of different phone numbers as well as an email that you can reach out to them if you need to. Okay, so the forms that you will use to report your annual performance report are the ED524 reporting forms. Those are the official forms. You'll use those now for your annual performance report. You'll actually use those a little later on in the year or down the road when you do your final performance report as well. So that includes all 5 of those parts. That should be in the chat box for you to download, but we'll put those up as we talk about each along the way. Your cover sheet, your executive summary, sections A, B, and C. There's also a link where you can go to. If you don't grab those documents and save them today, you can always visit that link. I see Alani's got it in the chat box for us, and you can download the most recent forms as well. You want to double check if you have something on file already, that you do have the most up-to-date form. That little expiration date in the upper right-hand corner of the form will tell you whether or not it's current. My form on screen says that this one is good through July 31st of 2024. So hopefully yours is also still current. And if you're not sure, just go ahead and download it from the chat box now. Okay, so let's go over the cover sheet. First, a few things that we want to highlight on here that we know are really important, or maybe some questions come up about this a lot. I'll also reference one of the tools that was put into the chat box that we've developed to support your reporting overall is a checklist. And this has a lot of the tips that we'll go over today for all of the different sections. But you can print that off and keep it handy just as a nice little reminder about some of the things to bear in mind as you're completing your forms. All right, so let's go over the cover sheet. First, item number 1, your PR and award number. I know many of you operate multiple grants, so you want to make sure that you get the correct PR award number up there for whatever report you happen to be working on. Now, item number 7. This is your reporting period. The correct reporting period for this annual performance report is October 1, 21 through March 31st, 2022. So 10/1/21 through 3/31/22. Item number 8 here is where you're going to actually enter dollar amounts, specifically in line B as in boy. You're going to enter the amount of your award that you have actually spent or obligated and drawn down. So the number that you enter into 5B should match what has been drawn down in G5 as of the reporting end date. There's 3 line items in section 8, although you're gonna leave A and C blank. We're not using those at this time. We'll use those a little later. So the reporting period for line 8B is the same as the reporting period, that October 1, 21 through March 31st, 2022. Okay, continuing on the same form, but same side of the form, but looking at item number 9. This is about indirect costs. You want to be sure that you're entering in the most up-to-date indirect cost information and then fill out that section appropriately. Sometimes, those indirect cost rates expire, or maybe other things change when that gets renewed. So just double check maybe that you have the most up-to-date information, but don't skip it. All right, item number 10. This question here asks about human subjects and institutional review boards. This one is not applicable to us. So everybody should be marking not applicable on item number 10. Item number 11, that last little X there on the bottom of the screen that just popped up, this is the last on the page, but it is very important. This is about data privacy and protection. So everybody is going to click yes for this one. And we also need you to include the corresponding policy that shows that those securities are in place. That can often be found in employee handbooks or those kinds of manuals. So you can just scan a copy of that or an excerpt of that and then upload that into G5. Okay. Looking now at the back of the cover sheet, a couple important details to note here. First, we want to highlight item number 12. This is about your performance measure status. So it asks you for your annual performance report if you have all of your data available. This question asks about complete data for your performance measures. So for item number 12, you're going to click yes if all of the data for all of your measures in your annual performance report are currently available for reporting. Sometimes, and it's totally fine if they're not, but here if all of your data are not currently available, you click no, and then you're going to state when that data will be available. Maybe it's not available now, but it'll be available later this year. But you're going to indicate a date as to when that will be available. So right now, we're actually in the middle of our grant project year, right? The grant project is going to run through the end of September. So you will be providing an update on this annual performance report around the end of October there, October 27th. There will also be a final performance report that comes after the end of the project. And that those final reports are not due until 120 days after the project year ends. We'll talk a little bit later about the possibility of no cost extensions if you happen to find yourself in that kind of a situation. Okay, so let's take a look at a couple examples for this item, specific to this item number 12, about when you should be saying yes, all our data are available, or no, all our data are not available. So we have a little pop quiz. We're not grading anybody, but we do want you to play along. So I have a couple of scenarios for you. And the question is, should this grantee report yes or no on item number 12 of the cover sheet? So the question for item number 12 is, are complete data on performance measures for the current budget period included in the project status chart? And the project measure in our scenario that this grantee is going to be reporting on is a project measure that reads 100% of students participating in the summer college expedition will complete financial aid forms and application forms for at least 2 post-secondary institutions. So you can give me your answer into the chat box, a yes or a no. Are all the data available? You can give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down on screen or with those reaction buttons if you like to play with those. I see a few folks playing along here. Thank you. Pretty consistent with the no's, and you're absolutely right. This data is not going to be included in this annual performance report because it won't be available until the conclusion of the summer program. All right, here's another one. Same question, different scenario. In this case, this grantee is reporting on a GEFRA measure, specifically the one that reads the percentage of annual measurable objectives as described in the application that are being met. So there's a few more details about the context here. The project has 4 measurable objectives listed in the application. One of the objectives reads that the College and Career Readiness Index of Native graduates will increase 15 points by the end of the project. So this is just a pretend example, but we were wondering, how should this grantee report on item number 12 for that cover sheet? Are all this data available or not? All right, I like the thumbs down, the little emojis there, that's fun. Again, pretty consistent in our responses. You guys get the gold star today. You're absolutely right. This data for this particular GEPRA, as well as that project measure that's referenced, will not be available. This data is going to be available, or the complete data for this GEPRA is only available once complete data for all the project measures are. And since this GEPRA is reporting on the total number of project measures met. Okay, does that make sense? I think everyone got the correct answer. All right, so this data is not available till the end of the project. All right, I think you got the gist of that one. So the last item that I want to draw your attention to on the cover sheet is the signature of that authorized representative. You want to be sure to let your authorized representative know to expect this form and possibly the report if they're going to be reviewing that before it goes in. Oftentimes that person, it could be your tribal chairperson or another busy administrator. So you just want to make sure that they know to expect it and that you'll be able to get their signature in time. So remember, you're going to complete this cover sheet in G5, or you can use that Word document that we've posted into the chat box. You're going to complete the form and then have your authorized representative sign that completed form. And then once it's signed, you can upload that into G5. And if you've done this before, you know that G5 likes to play with PDF files much more than other types of files. So there's another tip for you. If you're new to the game, plan to save your documents as PDFs, and G5 will give you a much easier time as you go along. Okay, I want to just lift up a few key points about your executive summary, and then we'll pause for any questions if there are any about the cover sheet in the executive summary. We've also posted a Word document of the executive summary. If you want to have that today, you can download and save a copy of that. So you have a 1 to 2 page maximum for this. This is really where you get to highlight your program's accomplishments and activities. You want to think about your project goals, your intended outcomes, and use this space to describe the extent to which your program was able to accomplish those things. Or if not, provide a rationale and explanation about why not. You know, maybe there were some lessons learned or some insights gained along the way, and you had to shift and you're able to overcome a challenge or accomplish goals in a different way. That's all information that's good to include in your executive summary. If those project goals and objectives weren't met, you can use this space to talk about some of those challenges that affected your project implementation. And then finally, in your executive summary, OIE wants to know about any contributions that your project has been able to make to research, knowledge, practice, or policy. Things that you may have learned from your program evaluation or trends and data that you've been able to document along the way. So another tip about developing your executive summary, because if you're working in G5, you know that it is programmed to time out periodically. And it does this whether you're actively moving around in there or not. It's just part of the security system and the way it operates. So you want, when you are working in G5, you want to be sure to save your work often. But when you're developing a narrative like the executive summary, really best to work on that outside of G5. If you're like me, it takes a little bit of time to really craft that narrative the way you want it to. So give yourself the time and space and luxury without the pressure of the timing out in G5. Put that together in another document outside of G5. And then when you're all ready, go ahead and copy and paste that into G5. Okay, I'm going to pause for a second and see if there's any questions about what we've covered so far.
Tracy, before we get to questions, I just want to say for my FY17 cohort grantees that are in here, or my any no-cost extensions, I have one FY18 who is in a no-cost extension, but this APR isn't. It's not for you. It's for you. You guys don't have to do an APR because you're in your no-cost extension year. I emailed you a final performance review sheet not too long ago that has your grantee, your PO number, or your number, your PR number, and with your due date for your FPR. If you have any questions on that at all, just email me and we will have a meeting about that. So this is for our FY18 grantees who have to submit an annual performance review this year.
Thank you. Thank you for clarifying that. And sorry if I wasn't clear about that.
No. I know you were. I just needed to make a little announcement. So, you know, we can do another FPR. So for my no cost extension guys, we can have a meeting, whatever you need, but you don't necessarily have to be here. So you're off the hook.
Glad we got that clarified. Are there any other questions about those 2 pages? Or at least those 2 forms? All right, we will keep on rolling to talk about section A and your project status chart. And we'll have some examples and another little pop quiz in the middle here for you to respond to as well. So on the screen right now, you see a screenshot of how this actually will appear in the G5 system. So this section A really contains the bulk of information that you submit for your annual performance report that demonstrates that substantial progress towards your goals and objectives. You know that these tables collect both quantitative data in the form of ratios and qualitative data in the form of a narrative explanation of progress. So let's talk through the different measures that you're going to actually put into here, starting with your GEPRA measures. So these probably look very familiar to you now. Our NYCP program has 2 GEPRA measures, that these are defined by the federal government, and everybody in the cohort reports on these measures. So remember that when you're reporting on these measures in section A, you're going to use the exact wording of that GEPRA measure that was defined by Ed in the notice inviting applicants, right? In some of these you might find that it's pre-populated in G5, but in case it's not, you know that all you have to do is copy and paste that exact wording of the GEPRA measure into that space where it says GEPRA measure text. These are all labeled GPRA. It's just a little drop down in the G5 system, so you're going to make sure that it's labeled correctly. And then for the GEPRA measures, we're only reporting on the actual ratios. So where you see the X's, we don't enter data into those sections. We're not reporting any raw numbers, no target ratios for your GEPRA measures, only the actual ratios. And then finally, what we don't see, well, there is you can see down there on the underneath it there is the blank space for you to type in that narrative or that qualitative data. We call that the explanation of progress, right? So this is where you're going to tell us about what that ratio represents, some context behind the number, and how that information is collected and tracked. And we're actually going to unpack your GEPRA measures a little bit to clarify exactly what you're reporting on and what should be represented in those ratios. So here they are again, your two GEPRA measures. We're going to talk through them one at a time. Their first GEPRA measure, which states which is about the objectives met, reads the percentage of annual performance measures as described. The percentage of the annual measurable objectives as described in the application that are being met. So for this one, your bottom number is the total number of project objectives that are defined in your application. And I should say briefly too that we're using the terms project measure and project objectives a little bit interchangeably here. So for this one, that bottom number is the total number of project objectives or project measures that you've defined and report on each year. The top number then is the number of those objectives that are being met. Okay. So for the second GEPRA, this measure is about the increase in community collaboration. This one reads the significant increase in community collaboration efforts that promote college and careers of Indian children as measured by increases in the number of active community partnerships. So for this measure, and this might be an update for you. The bottom number is 1. The top number of your ratio is the number of new partnerships that you've secured within that reporting period from October 1 through the end of March. So the number of new partnerships that you've acquired in that time. And that's the bottom number for everybody will be 1. Okay. So let's take a look here now at how this might actually look in the project status chart for section A. So these are examples of GEPRA measures, and just for today, for the sake of an example, I've included them both on one table. When you're doing your actual reporting, you might have these GEPRA measures on their own separate tables, but just for ease of facilitating, I just put them on one for us today. So we have the exact wording of the GEPRA measures, just how it was defined by the federal government. We've labeled them correctly as GEPRA measures, right? They're not unique to our program. These are the ones that everybody reports on. We're not putting anything in that target ratio column. We're only putting numbers into that actual ratio column. And then finally, we have down here at the bottom an explanation of progress that tells us a little bit about those numbers that we've reported on. So in our example here, in the top example, percentage of annual measurable objectives, you can see that this pretend grantee had 7, so that's the bottom number. We have 7 total project measures that they report on, and they have met 5 of those 7. And we see down here in the explanation of progress just a little bit about which of those project measures they've met and some information about behind those numbers. In the second one here, the one about increasing community collaboration, we see that the bottom number is 1. That's going to be 1 for everybody. And in this case, this pretend grantee has secured 2 new partnerships. So it's 2 over 1. And then we see down here below a little bit of information about how they've counted that and how they came up with those numbers.
And again, that's those partnerships that promote college and career readiness for the students that you're serving.
Thank you. Okay, let's talk for a minute then about now our project measures. So your project measures are those that are unique and specific to your grant project. And by now, those you've entered in these project measures a couple of times in previous annual performance reports. So you're going to use the exact wording that you've used previously. We locked that in previously, so now we're just updating our progress on that project, on that specific project measure. These are, of course, that text goes there in under the column performance measure. These are, of course, labeled PROJ for project measure. And for your project measures, we do enter ratios for both target and actual. So we're going to enter 2 ratios for all of our project measures. So we'll see in a couple slides some examples here of how that might look. All right, so here you can see in that space down below now where that narrative explanation of progress would go. You see that there where the text goes, where it gets labeled. Again, noting that we report target and actual ratios for all of our project measures. Those project measures are really the ones that were written that were specific to your grant and your approved grant applications. We're not creating any new measures at this point. So here's an example of what this could look like when all this information is entered. So we have 2 examples of pretended grantee project measures. One having to do with attendance rates, one having to do with participation in a summer college expedition and completing those forms. We've labeled those appropriately as project measures, and then we've included both the target and the actual performance ratios. Down below in our examples here, you can see that we've labeled these so that we know 1A corresponds with this first performance measure that we entered, and then we have some text related to 1B, which relates to the second project measure that we included. We talk in here a little bit about how that data was collected and how those numbers were calculated and what those ratios represent. So a few reminders about that project status chart in section A. Your reporting period is still October 1 to March 31st of this year. And recall when we were just talking a little bit ago about the cover sheet, we talked about that item number 12 and indicating yes or no, depending on whether all your data is included in the APR. Here in section A, we get a little bit more detailed about reporting on data that may not currently be available. So in section A, in your project status charts, data that are unavailable now, but will be before the end of the project period, the September, should be noted as a 999 in that project status chart. Data that are unavailable now, but will not be available right before the end of the project year is noted as 0. Okay, so a 0 is only reported for that measure if it does not exist for this project year. So one example could be if a grantee has a project measure related to school day attendance, but maybe during the pandemic, some schools that they were working with did not take attendance. And so in that case, the appropriate data to report would be 0. And then we would say in that narrative explanation of progress, we would explain what happened and why that was. Okay, so let's look at these examples one more time now in the context of reporting in section A. So instead of yes or no, are the data available? The question is, should this grantee in this scenario be reporting 999 or 0 in that project status chart? So you recognize this example here, right? This pretend grantee has a project measure that states 100% of students participating in the summer college expedition will complete financial aid application forms for at least 2 post-secondary institutions. Should this grantee be reporting 999 or 0? You'll recall that we did say the data was not available, but now we're getting a little more nuanced. Will it be available this project year or no? Excellent. You are all pros. You are correct. 999 is the correct answer because that data will be available in the summer of this year and before those updates come due in October. Excellent. Okay. Thank you for playing along. Let's do another one. Same question. Does this grantee indicate 999 or 0 in the project status chart? And this one is the same example that we were looking at earlier. So we already said that no, that this data is not going to be available for this grantee's GEPRA measure. They have a project that has 4 measurable objectives listed in the application. One of them is about college and career readiness index of Native graduates increasing by 15 points. By the end of the project. So is this 999 or is this 0? Perfect. Perfect. The correct answer is 999. The data is not yet available, but it will be available by the end of this NYCP fiscal year 18 project in September 2022. Very good. Okay, final scenario now. same question. Is this grantee reporting 999 or 0 for this project measure? So this pretend grantee has a project measure that says college and career readiness index of Native students will increase by 15 points by the end of the grant period. I think folks are typing in. Yep, there we go. You are absolutely right, 999. The data will be available by the end of the project, which is the September 2022. So for this year, for the fiscal year 18 cohort, the end of the grant year is also the end of the grant project. Okay. Very good. Thank you. Thank you for all your participation there. So let's dive into that narrative piece and that explanation of progress a little bit. This is an area that's where you really get to explain some of those numbers. And I promise, as you probably know, this information is read. We do look it over. It doesn't go into cyberspace, never to be looked at again. It's aggregated, it's reported on. And so we have a few tips to help make it easy on your reader and your program officer to know what it is represented in the quantitative data, in those ratios and numbers that you're reporting. So in the narrative explanation of progress, you want to talk about how you've met or made progress toward those objectives. If those objectives were not met, provide a detailed explanation about why and detail some of those steps that you've taken to address any challenges that you might have faced. Keep in mind, this should really be different than the text that you're entering into your executive summary. This is much more specific to the measures that you're reporting in those project status charts. You want to tell us about how the data were collected and when they were collected. Explain how that data is evaluated or analyzed, and any related activities and accomplishments. If data are not available, right? If you're giving us a 999 or a 0 in there, you still want to tell us some relevant information about steps taken to meet those objectives, and then when that data will be available. So we do have a few additional tips here, and actually some grantee examples to share. So you might recognize some of this if yours happens to be one of the examples that we're sharing. And again, I'm going to ask you to engage with us and either do some on-screen annotation or some posting in the chat box or some verbal responses too. So here are some things that we look for in that narrative explanation of progress, right? Details about the reported quantitative data, telling us what's represented in those numbers. Just like we unpacked those GEPRA measures, we need you to tell us what those numbers represent to you in your program. It really helps the reader if that narrative piece is clearly linked to each measure. If your project status chart has more than one measure in it, help your reader by labeling those so that we don't have to guess what pieces of the narrative correspond to which lines or which rows in that chart. And be sure to explain how the data is collected and compiled for reporting. Having read a few of these now in the past few years, I can say that piece is sometimes not there, and it's really helpful and important and helps to provide some context. So let's look at some examples here. And I see Olani posted those look-fors in the chat box, so you can scroll back up if you need to refer back to those. But on the screen right now, I actually have an example from one of our NYCP grantees. And what I'd like you to do is maybe consider that first look for, providing details about reported quantitative data. I'll give you a few quiet minutes to read. And then if you want to play on screen with those annotation tools, you can find those by looking at the top of your screen where it says viewing Tracy's screen. And next to that, there should be a drop-down menu and you'll be able to pick annotate. So you can draw a line under some text or put a box around some text or a little star next to some text that addresses that first look for, providing details about the quantitative data. If the annotation tools don't work for you or you can't find them or you just don't like them, feel free to type into the chat box. I'll give you an opportunity if you want to speak verbally too after you've had a minute to read. Got some people finding the annotation. That's cool. Yeah, okay, so we've got a circle around September 2020, so we know, as well as around March 31st, year 2 and year 3, so we know what, when, or what time frame this data is speaking to. I'm seeing some stars and some underlines about 25 additional organizations, around totaling 25 partnerships in all, a 50% increase in partnerships. So it's telling us about the data that's being reported and providing a little extra information and context. The narrative piece does include some qualitative data. So, you know, identifying how many partnerships, organizations, individuals, and agencies. And then I see some check marks around that 13%. So the narrative piece also has some quantifiable data in there as well. Very good. Okay, just checking anything in the chat box. Okay, I am going to go ahead. I have another example. Oh, I see Georgia has a question. What was the original number to reach? So I didn't pull the actual APR report, but that's a good question. That's a good question. So we would know, remember this, this is a GEPRA measure. So we're only reporting a target ratio for this one. And this one we would report, you know, that the number of new partnerships over the number one. So for this one, in year 3, 10 additional organizations, this grantee would be reporting 10 over 1. I hope that makes sense. Okay, I have another example I want to share. Thank you everybody for playing along with this one. I just want to clear the annotations real quick so that we can have a clean screen for the next one. Here we go. I'm going to go ahead and clear those. So thank you for playing along. If you like that, we can do the same thing for this one. And for this example, I invite you to consider those other 2 look-fors. So in this narrative, what pieces make this clearly linked to each measure? And is there any narrative in here that explains how data is collected and compiled? So go ahead, I'll give you a quiet minute to read. Feel free to use the annotation tools or the chat box to lift up the text or the elements that help link this to the measure and tells us how data is collected and compiled. Okay, I'm seeing some check marks around the specific assessments that are used to report on this. This is an example of a project measure. So that's good. That gives us information about how that data is collected. We know that those are the assessments that they use. Anything else that that tells us, again, like that helps us to clearly link it to those performance measures? Oh, I see more check marks around that 3A and 3B. So in this example here, this grantee included 2 performance measures in that project status chart. And then they very clearly told us here in the narrative that they're speaking to the 3A and 3B in that particular status chart. Little details like that are super helpful to your reader, so they know specifically which project measures are being addressed in this narrative when there's more than one in that project status chart. Very good. Okay. All right, so I'm seeing a mark there around the time frames too. This grantee in this narrative talks about some of the interruptions in data collection that didn't happen, and they talks in there about how they adjusted as a result of some of those assessments that didn't take place. All right, thank you. I'm going to clear those again, and then keep us moving along here to continue on to continue on to our budget section. But first, let me just pause and respond to any questions that have come up for you around section A. feel free to come off mute. I'm going to scroll in the chat box to see if there's any questions about Section A. I see people are asking about the recording. We do make this recording available on both the OIE webpage as well as the OIE Technical Assistance YouTube channel. So you will be able to revisit this recording. No questions about Section A so far? Okay. All right, let's go ahead and walk through Section B, all about B for budget. So as you know, for your budget reporting section, you are to provide both a narrative of your spending for this grant period. And this section here, now this section in G5 will expand as you type, so you can add information as you need. It's really helpful when you write your narrative for your budget section, if it's broken out by budget category. So in your budget reporting forms, you're reporting on specific categories, and it's helpful to also organize your narrative in that same way. Again, to make it easy on your reviewer to connect those texts with the numbers and categories that you're reporting. And once again, to highly recommend working on and developing your narrative outside of G5 in a separate document, and then once it's all done and set, you can copy and paste that into G5. So a few details here about what you're reporting in this budget section. So in your forms, you should be reporting the funds that are expended or obligated, even if they're not yet reflected in G5. Okay, through the last day of that reporting period. So we know that the drawdowns in G5 happen periodically, but it may be that you have spent some money, purchased some supplies, or spent some dollars that have not yet been drawn down in G5. So this is where, in the budget section, is where you tell us about those dollars. The reporting period is the same through that last day, March 31st, October 2022. Also in your narrative section, you'll want to talk about that, how frequently those G5 drawdowns take place. Or if applicable, maybe why drawdowns didn't happen. Ideally, we like to see those once per quarter. But if they didn't happen, how you tried to work and remedy that. And also how you are tracking expenditures independent of the budget office. So hopefully by now you all have made great friends with your folks in the fiscal office, so that they're able to provide you with the information for reporting, and they understand when drawdowns need to take place. You'll want to describe any challenges that you faced during the pandemic, and address any funds that may not be extended by the end of the project year. So anything that you might anticipate remaining, we'll want you to speak to that in your budget narrative. But first, a word about those no-cost extensions. So for our fiscal year 18 NYCP grantees, you know that this is the final year of your grant. So there is technically no carryover, right? If you anticipate any unexpected funds, you're going to have to secure approval for a no-cost extension. So if you anticipate any unexpected funds by the end of this project year, by the end of September, you want to speak to that, discuss how much funding you anticipate remaining, and why. Was it that somebody didn't get hired, or maybe project activities got delayed for some reason? We do want you to make every effort to use those allocated funds in the ways that they were appropriated. Although we recognize that sometimes projects are in a position that you might need a little extra time to complete those grant activities. So if that is the case for you and you anticipate submitting a request for a no-cost extension, indicate the portion that you expect to remain at the end of the project year, and then describe how you plan to use those funds to complete the activities in your approved application. Any questions about that? I see we have someone in the chat box here. Is any reporting due for the NYCP 15 data collections granted? And I think Donna spoke to this a little bit earlier. So if you have one of those earlier iterations of the grant and you're operating on a no cost extension, your final reports come 120 days after that final day of your no cost extension.
Yeah, and Tracy, this is actually in regards to a little bit different. There were some folks who had some data collection extensions. For those, I would recommend that you reach out about your specific program. You do not have an APR due in regards to that particular piece. But as far as whether you have something else due for your data collection extension, I would reach out in regards to your specific project.
Thank you, Sarah.
Gina, what do you mean whenever you say, do you have to get approval before completing this report for the APR? If it's the APR, you don't have to have it's a have to, you have to do the APR. For like this no cost extension, what Tracy's talking about, she's saying if you feel like you're going to, they are not guaranteed, and they can be requested later in the year. So if you're not sure about your funds, how they're going to be spent, because you still have the summer remaining, and you plan on spending them, but things happen all the time. I will be sending out more information about that later on in the year, around July or so. Is that what you mean, Gina? Okay.
Very good. Thank you, Donna. Okay, so here is your optional budget reporting tool that your technical assistance team has created to help you project what you may anticipate having available. So this is an optional form. We're going to post that in the chat box again if you weren't able to grab it at the top of the hour, at the top of the session. But we strongly encourage you to use this, but you may use your own form. Just please be sure that all of the information that's contained in this optional tool is also included in the form that you are using. So this screen highlights the sections of the optional budget reporting tool that where you actually enter information. So up at the top, you see the grantee name, award number, project director, right? Just so that it's easily referable to which grantee and which grant that this is speaking to. For this APR, you're only reporting in those categories. It's not a line by line item. You're reporting just that top level categories for personnel, fringe, travel, etc. You enter in your data for each column here, what was approved, what's been drawn down, anything that you might have spent money on but hasn't yet been drawn down from G5. And then that will auto calculate the available funds. All right, so you don't have to do anything in that column for available funds. You just enter in the numbers in the yellow sections there, and it'll auto calculate. Now, two columns here are narrative. You're not actually entering numbers, you're entering words. So please don't skip over those. This first one is about the rationale for available funds. You want to give us a word or two about why you have that amount of dollars in that particular category. The next column is another number. This is what you anticipate to be spent by the end of the grant year, by the end of the project year. That once you enter that number, it'll auto calculate if there's any estimated amount remaining at the end of the year. So this is a really helpful tool if you don't already use it to project out what you might have available. That last column here, be sure to include some information there. If you have some estimated amounts remaining, talk in here, provide a sentence or two about how you intend to use those funds to complete your grant activities. Okay, and of course, if you have any questions here, your technical assistance team is here to help. We want to help make this easy and smooth as possible for you so that we get complete information. So please feel free to reach out if you have any questions about that along the way. Any questions about budget?
Nothing's in the chat right now, Tracy.
Oh, I see. Just went up there.
Oh, there you go.
Right as you were speaking, in the budget, is the budget portion only for the current year's allocation, or does it include any carryover? So, someone correct me if I say anything incorrect here, but that approved budget column, that's the amount that you have available. It should reflect the numbers from your most recently approved budget, which would be any carryover from the last budget period.
Right. So whatever you had at the beginning of this performance period that had your carryover, your approved budget that you had, the one that I approved at the beginning of the year, it's going to have that which you had carryover. Some of you had carryover in that, and then your allocated amount as well. So that's going to go in your approved budget column, and then you're going to go and fill out the rest on each column.
Okay.
And Tracy, one question that comes up sometimes, when you're entering amounts into the spreadsheet, all of your numbers should be positive. Please don't try to put in a negative sign or anything. There are formulas in there that are going to take care of all that math for you, so you don't have to worry about using negative numbers in order to denote that you're subtracting something. Just put everything in as numbers and it'll take care of the rest all on its own.
Super helpful tool. Thank you, Sarah. Okay, well, I promised you that we had some new information for Section C, and that includes a new optional reporting form for Section C as well. So we posted that at the top of the hour. We'll post it again here as we start talking about this new information for Section C. So historically, we've always talked about Section C as being the place where you can include any information that either doesn't fit into your Sections A in that little space that you get for your explanation of progress, or if you need more space to talk about your budget. It can also be a place where for additional information that you want to share that doesn't have a home elsewhere. Sometimes grantees have shared photos or student work examples or news clippings. This is still the space where you can do that. We are still looking for information about your successes, your challenges, the status of your partnerships, any key personnel changes, and any challenges that arose due to the pandemic, and any information about the status of your project, or any unintended, unanticipated outcomes or benefits from your project. So we've provided sort of that general invitation to provide that information, but now we are offering this tool that is an optional reporting tool, but we really, really, really strongly encourage you to use this because there's information that is helpful that doesn't necessarily get captured elsewhere. And this tool also, we've designed it with the intention of being very intentional about capturing that information around partnerships, successes, and challenges. So It's in the chat box now. If you didn't get it already, you can download it now. And I'm going to talk through the information that we're looking for in this section. And again, if you choose not to use this optional Section C reporting tool, please take a look at it and include this information in Section C in your own format. Okay, so once again, first thing we always start off that grantee name, PR, ward number, project director, just to make sure that in case documents get separated, or we're looking at this, in different times, that we know exactly which grantee and which project that we're talking about. We have this form set up so that you can just tick off and click all those grade levels served, and we've included early childhood as well as adults and all the various grade levels here. We then are asking for you to include the total number of unique adults served during the reporting period and the total number of unique students served during the reporting period, as well as the total number of unique students and adults that you anticipate serving for the grant year. So during the reporting period from that October to March, and then for the remainder of this grant year, total number of unique students. We have a couple of questions related to staff time dedicated to the project. So we're interested in knowing, the percentage of time that your project director devotes to this specific grant. So very likely a project director is a full-time staff person, but they might only be devoting maybe 50% or 25% of their time to this specific grant. So we want to know what that percentage is. And then we want to know how many staff work full-time on the project and how many staff work part-time. And that part-time staff could be similar. It might be that you have all of your staff are full-time, but they only spend maybe 50% of their time devoted to this particular grant project. Click off in this section here all applicable times that this grant project provides services. It could be before, during, after school, weekends, holidays. Check all that apply there. And then this question asks about the methods of services that you're providing. And there's a little nuance here. So some of your services might be all in person. So you would click that you provide in-person services. If you have services that are provided only in an online or only in a virtual format, then you go ahead and click that virtual button in the middle. If you have services that are offered in both in-person option or a virtual online option, then that particular service we would refer to as hybrid. And if you have services that are hybrid, go ahead and click off that hybrid. So you could be offering all three types theoretically. Okay, continuing on, here's some more questions that we want to include in section C. Please list all the services that were provided for this year. What, if any, language learning services that your program is providing? Any and tell us which languages. The form also asks for any college and career readiness services or strategies that are offered or used by your program. We want to know about the evidence base for any of the services or strategies by your program. So in this section, we're asking you to name that strategy or service and then provide that research citation or reference. And some of this, what I'm sharing too, is also included in that tip sheet or that checklist, that overall checklist, which is another tool that we've provided for you to support your reporting. We want you to list all partners, and denote their current status. So even if they're inactive, go ahead and list them, label them as inactive, and then also include your active partnerships as well. Provide any details about key personnel changes or if you don't have any changes, you can just state no changes. Include some information here about any planned or plans that you may have for sustaining these program activities beyond the federal funding period. So if you're making plans now to sustain some of these activities and services beyond the end of this particular grant funding, tell us about that here. We have 2 questions related to any potential changes. Tell us about any planned changes to project activities for the remainder of the year, if there are any, so through September, if you're planning any changes. And then the next question specifically calls out any potential changes, specifically due to COVID in the remainder of the grant year. And then finally, the last 2 questions here only require 1-sentence response. So think of these last 2 questions as a headline, maybe. We want to know about your greatest success this reporting period, and then your greatest challenge in this reporting period. Just 1 sentence for each of those. Any questions about this new optional Section C reporting tool or what we're looking for? Okay, I've either wore everybody out or completely scared them, or it makes perfect sense and everyone feels really good about it. Oh, Georgia has a question. So items not in summary go here. By the summary, do you mean the executive summary, Georgia? Okay, yes. So if there's information maybe that you wanted to include in the executive summary, but you ran out of space, or there's more of your story to tell, then you can still include that here in Section C. We have enough time here. I actually do have a couple examples. Here we go. Yes, make sure I'm sharing the right thing here. Yes, here we go. So I do have a couple of examples of past APR reports and how your colleagues and peers have used Section C in the past. So let's see here. Here's a grantee. And this was before we put out this optional C section reporting form. So you can see here this grantee, they did nicely label their success stories and challenges. They gave details about the partnerships, nicely organized for us here, as well as any key personnel changes, and labeled those so that it was a nice, easy read. So we still ask about that information, and you can still provide that here. And to George's question too, yeah, if you have more information that didn't fit in other sections, you can include that. Let's see, that one was not coming up for me. Here's another example of a Section C that was reported previously. This is a nice example of a grantee providing some accolades or noting a significant progress, providing more context about the activities, providing some anecdotal information that they got, how they were able to overcome some challenges related to COVID and the pandemic. And so you can see there's a little bit of paragraph and narrative information, and then some bulleting of examples of some feedback and highlights, maybe some good news that was happening as a result of those activities. You know, other grantees have used this space to provide curriculum examples or examples of student work or whoopsie, sorry, I didn't mean to do that. Pictures or articles that have been written up. You can still use the space to provide that kind of information. Okay. All right. A few final words here as we get towards the end of our APR webinar here. So continuation awards, we're coming to the end of our grant year, so this is probably not the most applicable to us, but I will just reiterate what was shared about our no-cost extensions, which was that you want to give us a heads up about that in this current annual performance report, and know that they're not guaranteed, right? You're gonna let OIE know if you expect to be in that position, and if and then we'll go through that process to decide if that can be approved or not. Some reminders. The G5 will open for reporting as of tomorrow. Sorry, that should say March 18th on that top date. So as of tomorrow, you'll be able to get in for your NYCP reports into the G5 system. Keeping in mind that the project director is really the only person who has access to the G5 system and can access that report. That date in red is correct, that your APR deadline is April 29th of this year, 4:30, and not a second later. But I know you're all going to get them in way ahead of that deadline. So if you won't be able to get into G5 after that point. So make sure that you do finalize and submit that report with all of your signatures and all of that information and data included. Don't leave it in draft form, thinking that it's complete. Make sure that it does get submitted. Just one final reminder here about when that due date is. So if you haven't already got it on your calendar, you can set yourself a reminder and maybe even some checkpoints along the way, so that block off some time for yourself to work on that between now and then. Okay, so we do have some talking circles coming up, when you will be able to get some more support on any questions that you have coming up, or that you have related to your annual performance reporting. We also have your standing office hours that we're able to drop in, get access to your program officers, get any questions that you have. Of course, those office hours, as you know, are a little more informal. You can drop in and out as needed, or just hang out and listen to some of those questions and answers. If you want some individual support, if you feel like you still have questions, or maybe you get into your annual performance reports and you're like, I thought I knew what I was doing, I just need some clarification, feel free to reach out to your TA team, reach out to your program officer. The link on the screen right now, you can actually book some one-on-one time with your TA team. We'll go ahead and drop that link. Thank you, Olani, into the chat box. So feel free to reach out. We are here for you. We want this to not be stressful for you. We want to be a support for you, so that we can help you make sure that we get these on time and complete and beautifully written APRs. Any questions that came up that we didn't get to answer?
We are all here to help you with any questions, anything you have. We're all here to help. So reach out, email. You guys know how to get a hold of me, our amazing TA team, Synergy. So reach out to us, ask us as many questions as you need to. And let's not wait until the last minute. Let's go in and get them done.
Absolutely, absolutely, yes. Okay. We always do an in-session poll, and it should pop up on your screen right now. So please take 30 seconds to answer those 7 questions before you leave us today. We do use your feedback to help improve our technical assistance and support. So we really value your feedback, and thank you for responding to those. While you're doing that, I'm going to go ahead and share a few other important dates that we have, and some events that we want to make sure are on your radar. For all you project directors out there today, mark your calendars for May 10th through 12th. We will be hosting our project directors meeting on those days. It will be virtual this year, and we're excited to have you all together. Our theme this year, as you may have guessed, is celebrating the 50th anniversary of the creation of the Office of Indian Education. Also, in honor of the 50th anniversary of the Office of Indian Education, OIE has reignited the student artist, the Native American student artist competition. So we have 3 categories of art, one being open to students. One there you see is art open to students in early childhood through grade 12. That could be painting, drawing, printmaking, photography, computer art, textiles. That first category is very, very wide open. The second category is open to students in grades 4 through 12. This is a writing competition, a personal narrative essay, 1 to 2 pages in length. And then we also have a video art competition, right? Again, open to students in grades 4 through 12. No longer than 30 minutes. We're not looking for full feature-length films at this point, just as a smaller length film. But all entries must be submitted by April 15th. So please help us spread the word. Please share this with your kiddos, and with your community, and with your tribal nations and schools. We hope to get lots of entries. We're really excited about this competition being reintroduced. We have some information there, a couple links if you want more information, and an email that is specific to the student art competition there. So you can, if you have any questions about that, you can reach out and get some responses there. All right. Thank you so much for being here today. Thank you for participating. Thank you for asking those good questions. There is the contact information, just so you have that on your way out the door. You can get a hold of your program officers or your technical assistance team. It's really helpful if you can also include your grantee name and PR number when you're emailing OIE. That definitely helps to track your questions for a timely response. Okay, I see you've got the last few of those poll responses coming in. Thank you so much for your feedback. Please do that if you haven't already before you leave today. And thank you for joining us.